The prince turns into a frog when complimented. Guess who has to kiss him? I was perfectly happy being a grumpy, emotionally unavailable witch with zero interest in royal drama, until the palace blackmailed me into breaking a curse on their oh-so-charming prince. Sounds simple, right? Just one kiss to undo the spell. Easy. Except, plot twist, I have to genuinely hate him for it to work. And the worst part, I don't hate him. Not even a little. In fact, the more he annoys me, the more you'll see. There's magic, curses, frogs, and way too many feelings. Let's get into this mess. Silly story begins. Please like and subscribe. Chapter 1. The Art of Avoiding People and Other Spells. The thing about people is, they're exhausting. They talk too much, they expect eye contact, and worst of all, they have feelings. Disgusting, squishy feelings that ooze into conversations like emotional molasses. Which is precisely why I live on the cursed edge of the Gloomwood, where the plants are as unfriendly as I am. It's a charming little swamp. The kind of place where the fog clings to your ankles like a needy ex, the trees whisper insults when the wind blows just right, and if you step off the path, the ground politely tries to eat you. Home sweet home! I run a modest potion shop called Crow's Curses and Questionable Remedies, tucked between a half-collapsed willow and a suspiciously sentient mushroom. My clientele mostly consists of desperate villagers, petty hex enthusiasts, and the occasional traveler who ignores the turn back or die sign nailed to the front door. And then there's Spite, my cat. Technically, he's my familiar, but I hesitate to use that term because it implies cooperation. Spite is a ball of black fur, malice, and bad decisions. His hobbies include glaring, biting people who aren't me, and knocking fragile objects off shelves with the precision of an emotionally vindictive god. Today was shaping up to be a perfectly miserable morning, just the way I like it. The rain was coming down sideways, the cauldron was bubbling ominously without any clear reason, and Spite had already bitten 2 customers before noon. Bliss. That is, until it arrived. It started with a knock on the door, which was odd because 1. No one knocks. 2. Anyone with half a brain avoids knocking, lest the door knocks back. I opened it cautiously, expecting a traveling merchant, or perhaps an overly ambitious debt collector. Instead, there stood a royal courier, soaked to the bone, holding an envelope sealed with enough wax to smother an ego. Miss Tilda Crowe? He asked, eyeing me like I was an unexpected mold growing on his sandwich. That's debatable. He thrust the envelope at me as if proximity alone might curse him. By order of His Majesty, King Edric of Eldris. Return to sender, I said, and tried to close the door. Unfortunately, the envelope had already crossed the threshold, which meant it exploded in a puff of glittering, enchanted smoke, rude, and unspooled itself midair, unfurling like a dramatic scroll at a mediocre theater production. It read, to Tilda Crowe, which of questionable repute, offensive, but accurate. You are hereby summoned to the royal court to assist in the urgent matter of breaking a curse placed upon His Royal Highness, Prince Grayson Drake. I blinked. Prince Grayson Drake? The kingdom's golden boy? The man whose face probably had its own fan club? The royal poster child for charm, heroism, and uncomfortably perfect hair? Hard pass. I crumpled the scroll and tossed it into the cauldron, expecting that to be the end of it. It wasn't. The scroll reappeared in my hand. I threw it in the fire. It reappeared. I tried feeding it to Spite. He refused, offended. Finally, I read the fine print. Failure to comply will result in the immediate revocation of your magical license, confiscation of your property, and possible transformation into an inanimate object of our choosing. Charming. With a heavy sigh, I looked at Spite. Well, I guess we're going to the royal court. Spite blinked slowly, then knocked over a bottle of exploding ink in protest. Fair. Chapter 2. Royal Pain, aka The Prince Problem. The royal palace of Eldris was everything I hated, shiny, loud, and full of people with more titles than common sense. I was escorted through endless marble hallways, my muddy boots leaving satisfying footprints on the pristine floors. Spite perched on my shoulder like a furry, judgmental epaulet, occasionally hissing at passing nobles. Finally, we reached the throne room, a cavernous space filled with velvet, gold, and the overwhelming scent of expensive disappointment. And there he was. Prince Grayson Drake? Even cursed, he managed to look insufferably handsome, tousled dark hair, annoyingly symmetrical face, smile like he'd just thought of a joke he was too charming to share. He stood confidently at the center of the room, surrounded by courtiers whispering praises, and then, poof, in a burst of green light, he was gone. Replaced by a very disgruntled-looking frog. The room fell into stunned silence. Well, I said, crossing my arms. At least now he's more proportionate to his brain. The frog blinked slowly. Then, poof, he was human again, dusting off his sleeves as if spontaneous amphibian transformations were just a minor inconvenience. Behold, he announced with a dramatic flourish, the kingdom's greatest disappointment. I squinted at him. Finally, something we agree on. Chapter 3, the first, failed, attempt to break the curse. There are few things in life I truly despise: forced social interactions, lukewarm tea, and, apparently, Prince Grayson Drake. After our charming introduction in the throne room, where he turned into a frog, and I discovered I could still be unimpressed by royalty even when they were amphibians, I was escorted to a smaller, private chamber to begin the curse-breaking process. As if curses were like particularly stubborn stains you could scrub out with enough vinegar and elbow grease. The chamber was obnoxiously elegant, sunlight spilling through stained glass windows, walls lined with ancient tapestries depicting heroic deeds and tragic betrayals, you know, royal family stuff. A massive chandelier dangled overhead, threatening to crush us all with the weight of its pretension. Prince Grayson lounged on an overstuffed velvet chair like he was posing for a portrait titled, "Man Who's Never Had a Bad Hair Day." I hated him immediately, not because he'd done anything specific yet, just on principle. So I began, setting my satchel on the nearest table, and pulling out a few enchanted tools. Let me get this straight. You turn into a frog whenever someone compliments you? Grayson grinned. Yes. Tragic, isn't it? Cursed for being too charming. I stared at him, unimpressed. Sounds more like a self-inflicted condition. His grin didn't falter. I prefer to think of it as a side effect of excellence. Spite, perched on the table, hissed at him. Grayson flinched. I liked Spite even more in that moment. I sighed and pulled out a small crystal orb, enchanted to detect the magical aura of curses. Holding it near Grayson, I watched as it flared a sickly green. Yep, I muttered. Cursed, all right. I could feel the layers of spellwork woven into his aura. It was messy, tangled, like someone had stitched together multiple enchantments without bothering to check if they were compatible, which was a problem. But not my problem. I just needed to break it, get paid, and return to my swampy hermitage, where people like Grayson were nothing more than bad punchlines in my head. According to the royal scroll, the curse could be broken by one simple thing: a kiss from someone who genuinely dislikes him. Honestly, it sounded too easy, but I wasn't about to argue with the prospect of finishing this job quickly. I turned to Grayson. All right, let's get this over with. His eyebrows lifted, amused. You're very forward. Most people at least buy me dinner first. Yeah. Well, I'm not most people, and if this works, I'll happily never see you again. I leaned in. It was not romantic. It was the least romantic kiss in the history of kisses, a business transaction sealed with minimal enthusiasm and maximum scowling. Our lips met for exactly 1.3 seconds, I counted. Then I pulled back, wiped my mouth like I'd just licked a toad, ironic, really, and waited. Nothing happened. Grayson blinked. Still human. No dramatic poof. No magical sparkle. No triumphant end credits music. I frowned. Maybe I didn't hate you enough. Grayson looked way too pleased with himself. I have that effect on people. I didn't like this, not just because the curse was still intact, but because there was something off about it. Something buried beneath the surface. I leaned closer, pretending to inspect him for magical anomalies, mostly because I wanted an excuse to glare at him from an uncomfortably close distance. That's when I saw them. Faint, almost invisible unless you were looking for them. Strange runes etched along the edge of his collarbone, hidden beneath the curse's magic. Not part of the original spell. Something had been added. Where did you get these? I asked sharply, tracing the air above the runes without touching them. Grayson followed my gaze, frowning for the first time. I don't know. They've always been there, I suppose. No, I thought. They haven't. Someone had tampered with his curse. Deliberately. And suddenly, this wasn't just an annoying royal problem. This was something much, much bigger. Chapter 4, The Reluctant Partnership. Because my life isn't hard enough. In my professional opinion, nothing ruins a perfectly good day like realizing you've accidentally signed up for feelings and royal conspiracy. I'd come to Eldris to break a simple curse, collect my fee, and return to my swamp, where the only drama involved carnivorous plants competing for sunlight. But now, here I was, standing way too close to Prince Grayson Drake, staring at magical runes etched into his annoyingly flawless skin, and realizing two very important things. One, this curse wasn't simple. Two, I was in so much trouble. I'm not helping you with this, I declared, because setting boundaries is important. Grayson blinked, clearly not expecting that response. You literally came here to help me. Yes, to break a curse. Not unravel a magical mystery tied to royal politics. I didn't sign up for, whatever this is. I gestured vaguely at his face, which unfortunately remained attractive despite my best efforts to be immune. Spite, still perched on my shoulder, let out a disgruntled hiss of agreement. Or maybe he was just bored. Hard to tell with him. Grayson crossed his arms, his expression shifting from amused to something dangerously close to earnest. Look, you're the only witch in the kingdom who hasn't tried to kill me, or turn me into a decorative garden ornament. That makes you my best option. That's tragic for both of us. But, he added, leaning slightly closer, you're curious? I can see it. You want to know why the curse isn't working. Why someone tampered with it. Why? I will hex your mouth shut. He grinned, entirely unbothered. Worth it. The smart thing to do would have been to leave, pack up my cursed cat, collect my half-earned fee, and disappear back into the comforting embrace of my aggressively antisocial swamp. But here's the problem. Curiosity is basically the witch equivalent of a terminal illness. I kept thinking about those runes, about the layered spellwork, the subtle traces of magic that felt eerily familiar in a way I couldn't explain. So naturally, I found myself saying, fine, but I'm not doing this because I like you. Grayson's smile was pure mischief. I wouldn't dream of it. I hated him a little more right then, which honestly felt like progress. Our first destination was clear, Hollow Hill, home of the legendary cursebreaker known as the Crone. Rumor had it she could unravel any spell, provided you paid her in rare magical artifacts, or occasionally, blood. The details were fuzzy. Grayson insisted on coming along. Apparently, being cursed didn't exempt him from making terrible decisions. The journey was exactly as unbearable as you'd expect. Grayson talked. A lot. About royal politics fascinating, I lied. About his heroic adventures. I'm sure the dragon surrendered out of boredom, I muttered. About himself in general. The worst part? He was funny. Not in the charming, polished way you'd expect from a prince, but in a ridiculous, self-deprecating way that snuck past my defenses when I wasn't paying attention. I found myself almost laughing once. I covered it with a cough. Spite gave me a judgmental look. Of course, the curse had impeccable timing. It triggered whenever someone so much as complimented Grayson's hair, smile, or, once, his heroic ability to fall off a horse without dying. Poof! Frog. The worst incident happened at an inn, where a flirtatious barmaid batted her lashes and purred, "You've got the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen." Poof! Grayson's tunic collapsed in a heap, replaced by a disgruntled frog sitting in the middle of the floor. The barmaid screamed. Spite tried to eat him again. I sighed, picked up the frog, and stuffed him in my satchel like expired produce. Don't make this weird, I muttered. Ribbit? Later that night, while Grayson was temporarily human again, and snoring like royalty deserved to be smothered with a pillow, I studied the runes etched into his skin. There was something about the spellwork, something that tugged at the edge of my memory. I traced the air above the symbols, feeling the faint pulse of magic beneath them. I've seen this before, I thought. But where? Spite jumped onto the table, his glowing eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of the runes. He hissed softly, as if recognizing something I couldn't yet name. I didn't sleep much that night. Chapter 5, The Discovery. A curse within a curse. You know that sinking feeling when you realize you've made a terrible life choice? Like eating suspicious street food, or agreeing to a second date with someone who says things like, "I'm just really into vibes." That was me. Except instead of food poisoning or awkward small talk, I was stuck on an ill-advised road trip with a cursed prince, a homicidal cat, and the growing suspicion that I was in way over my head. We were 3 days into our journey when the curse decided to stage its most dramatic performance yet. The road twisted through dense woods, the kind where the trees leaned a little too close, like they were eavesdropping. I was walking ahead, pretending not to care whether Grayson was keeping up. He was rambling about some heroic nonsense, and then I swung from the chandelier to save the ambassador's daughter, though technically she didn't need saving. But it was a very impressive swing. I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly gave myself a concussion. And then, without warning, poof. No flirtatious compliments this time. No adoring fans. Just spontaneous frugification. Grayson's boots hit the ground with a sad thud, his royal tunic crumpling like a deflated ego. I froze mid-step, staring at the little green blob sitting pathetically in the dirt. "What now?" I snapped, stomping back toward him. "Did a squirrel compliment your posture? Did the wind whisper sweet nothings?" Ribbit? Spite darted out of the bushes, eyes glowing, clearly thrilled at yet another opportunity to commit amphibian murder. I snatched Grayson up before Spite could pounce. But something was wrong. Normally, the curse was quick, almost comical. A pop, a frog, a sigh. But this time, there was a residual shimmer of magic hanging in the air, faint runes flickering where Grayson had been standing. And his frog form felt heavier. Not physically. I wasn't suddenly holding a brick disguised as a prince, but magically, like the curse had thickened, layers folding over themselves. I frowned, cradling the disgruntled frog like he was a very unfortunate loaf of bread. This isn't normal, I muttered. Ribbit? Grayson agreed. That night, we made camp beneath crooked trees that looked like they'd witnessed too many bad decisions. Grayson had shifted back to his human form, slumped against a log, still looking dazed. I set up my tools, crystals, enchanted threads, a charm that was supposed to buzz when near dark magic, but mostly just complain like a drunk mosquito. Grayson watched me with tired eyes. You know, most people find me devastatingly attractive. You glare at me like I owe you money. Do you? I asked absently, focusing on the runes. Emotionally, perhaps. I ignored him, tracing the faint etchings on his skin. They weren't part of the original curse. That much was clear now. These symbols weren't just ornamental. They were active, woven into the curse's foundation like hidden wires in a crumbling wall. I muttered a spell under my breath, a soft incantation meant to reveal layered magic. The runes glowed faintly, threads of dark enchantment spreading like cracks beneath the surface. And suddenly I saw it. A curse within a curse. Someone had tampered with the original spell, reinforcing it, twisting it, not to punish Grayson for being insufferable, though that would have been understandable, but to make sure it couldn't be broken. I recoiled slightly, my heart racing. Grayson, I whispered, someone did this on purpose. This isn't just about you being charming. This is about keeping you cursed. His smile faltered for the first time. But, why? Good question. As I studied the runes, something tugged at the edges of my memory. The style of spellwork, it felt familiar. Not in a comforting way, like the smell of swamp moss after rain, but in the way you recognize a shadow following you when you thought you were alone. I'd seen magic like this before. Long ago? Spite crept closer, his hackles rising, eyes glowing faintly as he stared at the cursed markings. His reaction was too intense for simple curiosity. It was recognition, which begged the question. What did my cat know that I didn't? Later, as the fire crackled low, Grayson broke the silence. You know, he said softly, staring into the flames, I used to think being charming was my greatest talent, but lately, I wonder if it's just a distraction. I didn't respond, mostly because admitting he was more than just an arrogant prince felt like losing. After a long pause, he added, thank you for not giving up. I snorted. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I hate unsolved mysteries, and because if I don't fix this, I'll never get paid. He smiled faintly. Of course. All business. Exactly. Except, maybe not. Chapter 6. The Assassin in the Shadows. Because things weren't complicated enough. If you've ever had that feeling, like someone's watching you, it's probably because they are. Or, in my case, because an assassin is actively trying to murder you, and your emotionally exhausting royal companion. Honestly, I preferred the cursed prince, at least when he tried to die it was accidental. We left camp at dawn, because Grayson insisted that heroes rise with the sun, and I insisted that he shut up unless he wanted to rise with a face full of hexes. The road ahead was empty, too empty. The kind of empty that felt intentional. We passed through a crumbling village where shutters banged against windows like the buildings themselves were nervous. Grayson kept his usual overly chipper expression, but I felt it, the prickle at the back of my neck, like a spell gone wrong. Then I saw it, a single coin, gleaming unnaturally bright in the dirt. Now, I'm not the sentimental type when it comes to lost money, but this coin, it practically hummed with dark magic. I picked it up cautiously, inspecting the faint runes etched into its surface, black lines that twisted like vines choking the metal. Grayson peered over my shoulder. Whoa, treasure. I smacked his hand away. It's cursed, you idiot. Ah, he said thoughtfully. Less exciting. Spite hissed, fur bristling as he stared at the coin. His reaction wasn't normal, even for him. He'd hissed at plenty of things, magical artifacts, Grayson, my cooking. But this was different. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the same sickly hue as the runes. Something about this magic felt familiar. and that was never a good sign. We made camp near a rocky outcrop, mostly because Grayson complained that walking too much is undignified. I pretended to ignore the coin's presence, though it burned in my satchel like a bad decision I couldn't undo. That night, I woke to the unmistakable sound of someone not trying hard enough to be quiet. I jolted upright, dagger in hand, just as a shadow darted between the trees. Grayson snored blissfully beside the fire, completely unaware that we were moments from being stabbed. Typical. I nudged him with my foot. Wake up. We're about to die. He blinked blearily. Couldn't it wait until morning? No. No, it could not. An arrow whizzed past, narrowly missing my head. I dove behind a tree, dragging Grayson with me. Okay, now I'm awake, he muttered, rubbing sleep from his eyes as if arrows were just mildly inconvenient. I peeked out, spotting a figure cloaked in shadows, swift, precise, and very much trying to kill us. Assassin, I hissed. Grayson brightened. Whoa, good. I was worried it might be something serious. The assassin moved like liquid shadow, slipping between trees, blades gleaming faintly with runes that matched the cursed coin. I threw a hex, sharp and fast, designed to disarm. The assassin dodged effortlessly, retaliating with a dagger that embedded itself in the tree inches from my face. Grayson, ever helpful, chose that moment to yell, "Hey, over here!" The assassin pivoted, and that's when someone, Grayson, decided to be charming. Is that all you've got? He taunted, flashing his signature smug grin. Poof! There was a princely tunic on the ground, and a frog. I lunged, scooping up Grayson mid-ribbit before the assassin could redecorate the forest with royal frog guts. Are you serious right now? I screeched, hurling another spell with my free hand. The assassin vanished into the shadows as suddenly as they'd appeared, leaving behind nothing but cursed coins scattered like breadcrumbs. I paced the campsite, still holding Grayson the frog. This is getting ridiculous, I muttered. I am not babysitting a cursed amphibian and dodging assassins. Ribbit. Spite stared at me, unimpressed. Once Grayson defrogged, he sat cross-legged, rubbing his temples. On the bright side, I'm harder to kill when I'm small and squishy. That's not how survival works. But I wasn't really focused on him. I was thinking about the coins, the runes, the assassin's magic. It all connected somehow. I pulled out one of the coins, holding it up to the firelight. The runes shimmered faintly, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I felt a pulse of recognition. This magic wasn't just familiar, it was tied to me, to my past. Spite prowled closer, sniffing the coin. His eyes flared with eerie light, and he hissed, a low, guttural sound I'd never heard from him before. Okay, I whispered, staring at my cat like he'd just recited Shakespeare. What's your deal? Spite didn't answer, because he's a cat, but something told me he knew exactly what was going on, and that was somehow worse than not knowing at all. Chapter 7. Emotional Turmoil and Almost Confessions. There are few things in life I hate more than feelings. Rain-soaked cloaks? Annoying. Overcooked potion ingredients? Infuriating. Feelings? A catastrophic, universe-level mistake. But there I was, stuck in the woods with Prince Grayson, cursed coins, an assassin on our trail, and emotions knocking politely at the door of my sanity like, "Hi, we're here to ruin everything." The morning after the assassin's surprise visit, the campfire smoldered in awkward silence. Grayson poked the ashes with a stick, looking entirely too casual for someone who'd almost been turned into an ex-prince kebab. Spite sat perched on a log, glaring at both of us like we were the disappointments in his life. I fiddled with one of the cursed coins, the runes pulsing faintly under my thumb. My brain wouldn't stop spiraling about the magic, the assassin, the way Spite clearly knew more than he let on, and Grayson, mostly because he wouldn't stop being there, existing, breathing all charming like. You're quiet, he said, breaking the silence. I shot him a look. I'm plotting your demise. It requires focus. He grinned like my threats were compliments. They weren't, mostly. Later, as we walked along a narrow path winding through tangled woods, Grayson slowed until he was beside me. I could feel him looking at me. You know that feeling when someone's gaze is like a pebble in your shoe? That. Can I ask you something? He said finally. I sighed. Technically, yes. Should you? Probably not. But he pressed on. Because of course he did. Why do you hate me? He asked, his voice unusually soft. I stumbled slightly, tripping over nothing but my own surprise. Hate's a strong word, I muttered. I'd prefer intensely irritated by. He gave me a look, one of those annoyingly earnest ones that made it hard to be snarky. Tilda, you risked your life to save me multiple times. That doesn't exactly scream hatred. I opened my mouth to retort, but nothing witty came out. My brain betrayed me, flooding with memories. The way his smile lingered after I made him laugh, the warmth in his voice when he wasn't being insufferable, the infuriating flutter in my chest whenever he wasn't a frog. Curse him. Literally, I stared straight ahead, my voice tight. I don't hate you. I hate that I don't hate you. The words slipped out before I could stop them, hanging in the air like an accidentally summoned ghost. Grayson blinked, then smiled slowly, the kind of smile that could start wars or, worse, conversations about feelings. But before he could respond, poof, he turned into a frog. I stared down at the little green menace sitting where Prince Grayson had been. You've got to be kidding me, I groaned, picking him up by his squishy, undignified self. Ribbit, he replied, which I'm pretty sure was frog for, wow, great timing, thanks for sharing your feelings, Tilda. I carried him in silence, my heart racing like I'd just downed 3 cups of enchanted espresso. It was easier when he was a frog. No smirks, no charming eyes, just slimy, judgmental ribbits. That night, after Grayson finally defrogged, we sat by the fire in silence, the kind of silence that felt full, like it was waiting for something. I stared at the flames, refusing to look at him. Finally, he spoke. You said you don't hate me. I groaned. I was delirious from stress. He laughed softly. I don't think that's how emotions work. I clenched my jaw, trying to summon my usual snark, but it fizzled out like damp firewood. Look, I snapped, this doesn't change anything. I'm still here because of the curse, not because I cut myself off. Nope, not finishing that sentence. Grayson didn't push, he just smiled that infuriating, heartwarming smile, and said, good night, Tilda. I hated him. I hated that I didn't hate him. And worst of all, I hated that he knew. Chapter 8. The curse is tied to the royal family's dark secret. The next morning, I woke up determined to pretend the previous night's emotional hiccup never happened. Unfortunately, Grayson didn't get the memo. We were heading toward Hollow Hill to find the crone, a legendary cursebreaker who, according to local rumors, was either 1,000 years old, or someone's very cranky grandmother. Possibly both. Grayson hummed as we walked, annoyingly cheerful despite the fact that we'd nearly been assassinated, cursed, and emotionally compromised within the same 48 hours. I, on the other hand, was laser-focused on one thing, avoiding eye contact. Because when you accidentally confess, sort of, that you don't hate someone, the safest course of action is to pretend they don't exist. Unfortunately, Grayson existed with great enthusiasm. Lovely weather, he said cheerfully, despite the gloomy, overcast sky. Perfect for cursed quests and emotional repression. I tripped over a tree root, deliberately. We stumbled upon an old, crumbling chapel nestled between twisted trees. Its stone walls were covered in moss, like the forest itself had decided, no, thank you, and tried to swallow it whole. It was the perfect place for a break, or, as I preferred to call it, sitting silently, and not talking about our feelings. Inside, the air was thick with dust and lingering magic. Faded murals lined the walls, scenes of royal history, depicting heroic kings, noble warriors, and one very familiar face. I froze. In one of the murals, barely faded with time, was Prince Darius, the same smug tilt of his head, the same piercing gaze, but something was different. In the painting, dark runes were etched into his skin, hidden beneath layers of gilded armor, runes that matched the cursed coins. My heart dropped into my boots. Grayson noticed my reaction, and stepped closer. What is it? I didn't answer. Instead, I traced the runes on the wall, whispering an identification charm. The faint glow that responded was unmistakable. This was blood magic. Royal blood magic. And it wasn't ancient history. It was recent. Outside the chapel, the air felt heavier, as if the trees themselves were listening. I rounded on Grayson, my voice sharper than I intended. You knew something about this curse, didn't you? He blinked, caught off guard. Tilda, I don't. I held up a hand. No more jokes. No more charm. Just, tell me the truth. For once, he didn't smile. I thought I could fix it before you found out, he admitted quietly. I didn't want to drag you into my family's mess. Too late for that. Grayson ran a hand through his hair, pacing. The curse isn't just about me being vain. It's tied to my family. Punishment for something that happened years ago. A betrayal? I crossed my arms. What kind of betrayal? His jaw clenched. One I didn't commit. There was a long pause, filled only by the rustle of wind through dead leaves. Finally, he said, it was my brother, Prince Dorian. Grayson explained that Dorian had been obsessed with power, dabbling in dark magic their family had sworn to outlaw. When things went wrong, when the magic started consuming people, leaving behind cursed artifacts like the coins, weirdly enough, Dorian didn't take the blame. Instead, he pinned it on Grayson. Of course he did, because what's royal sibling rivalry without betrayal, curses, and a casual assassination attempt? The curse was more than just a punishment. It was a way to keep Grayson out of the way, to ensure he'd never be seen as a true heir. Just the kingdom's charming, cursed joke. And here I was, caught right in the middle of it. I sat down heavily on a fallen log, trying to process everything. Grayson joined me, unusually quiet. I didn't lie to you, he said softly. Not exactly. I just didn't tell you the whole truth. That's still lying, I snapped. Fair. We sat in silence for a while. Then, because apparently I can't help myself, I muttered, I really hate you right now. His lips twitched into the faintest smile. But not completely, I groaned, burying my face in my hands. Why are you like this? Spite hopped onto my lap, kneading aggressively as if to say, finally, some emotional growth. But his eyes weren't on me, they were fixed on the cursed coin in my hand. And for just a moment, they glowed faintly, like they recognized the magic, like he recognized it. I had the sinking feeling that Spite knew exactly what was going on, and that terrified me more than any curse. Chapter 9, Betrayal and Separation. Because apparently, we can't have nice things. If you told me a month ago that I'd be emotionally compromised over a cursed prince with commitment issues and a tendency to turn into amphibians, I would have hexed you on principle. And yet, here we are. We didn't talk much after the chapel. The woods grew darker as we pressed on, the trees taller and twisted, like they'd been shaped by something other than nature, something darker. Spite rode on my shoulder, flicking his tail like he was judging both of us, which felt fair. Grayson walked ahead, unusually silent. No quips, no charming deflections, just silence, which frankly was worse, because now I had to be alone with my thoughts. Thoughts like, why does it hurt that he lied? And, why do I care if he's sad? And the worst one of all, when did I stop wanting to break this curse and start wanting to break his face for making me feel things? Hollow Hill wasn't what I expected. No ominous fortress or creepy cave, just a crumbling stone tower nestled between jagged cliffs, half swallowed by mist and vines. The kind of place that screamed definitely cursed, please enter for emotional damage. We approached cautiously. Spite hissed, his eyes glowing faintly again. A detail I decided to ignore, because I was already emotionally maxed out. The door creaked open before we even knocked. The crone of Hollow Hill was waiting. She looked exactly like someone named the crone should, hunched over, with sharp eyes that felt like they could peel back your soul like an onion. She didn't bother with greetings, just gave us a once-over and said, "You're late." Inside, the crone's home was filled with oddities, jars of things I didn't want to identify, books that whispered to themselves, and a skull wearing a jaunty little hat. Grayson explained our situation, his curse, the royal mess, the whole accidental emotional entanglement with a grumpy witch subplot. The crone listened, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "The curse was never meant to be broken." Silence. I frowned. What do you mean never meant to be broken? She gave me a pitying look, which I hated on a molecular level. This curse isn't just a punishment, it's a prison, a leash. She turned to Grayson. Your brother didn't curse you to humble you. He cursed you to control you, to keep you small. Grayson's face went pale. I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. All this time, I thought we were trying to undo a mistake, but we weren't. We were unraveling a trap. And then it got worse, because the crone wasn't just the messenger. She was part of it. Before I could process what she'd said, her hand shot out, casting a spell faster than I could react. Runes lit up around Grayson, dark magic, ancient and binding. He collapsed to his knees, gasping. I moved on instinct, flinging a blast of magic at the crone. She deflected it with a lazy flick of her wrist. You really thought this was about him? She sneered. This curse was never just his problem. It was yours too, witch. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? I demanded, summoning every ounce of magic I had left. She smiled, a sharp, ugly thing. You're not here by accident. Your blood is part of the spell. You were always part of it. Grayson managed to look up. His face twisted in pain. I knew, he croaked. Not all of it, but I knew something was wrong. I stared at him, my heart cracking open like a poorly made potion bottle. You used me, I whispered. He shook his head desperately. No, I wanted to break the curse. I didn't let him finish. I turned and ran. Because fighting monsters is easy. Fighting feelings? That's impossible. I didn't look back. Not when I heard him call my name. Not when spite me out angrily, clearly disapproving of my life choices. Not even when I felt the curse's magic pulse in the air, dark and heavy, like the world itself was breaking apart. I just kept running, because it was easier than staying. Chapter 10, Tilda's Hidden Past, because apparently, I have one of those too. You know that feeling when your entire life turns out to be a lie? Yeah, that. I didn't know how long I ran. Long enough for the mist to turn thick, and the trees to blur together like smudges on an old map. Spike clung to my shoulder, digging his claws in like he was personally offended by my emotional crisis. Don't look at me like that, I snapped, breathless. This is a perfectly reasonable reaction to betrayal, dark magic, and Spike bit my ear. Oh, rude. He leapt down, landing gracefully in front of me, his green eyes glowing faintly in the dark. He stared at me like he was waiting. For what? I didn't know, until I realized where I'd ended up. An ancient stone arch stood before me, half buried in moss and shadow. Strange runes carved into the stones pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat I could feel in my teeth. The same runes I'd seen on the cursed coins. The same runes on Grayson's skin. And I froze. The same runes carved into the back of the necklace I'd worn my entire life. The necklace I'd never taken off. My hands shook as I unfastened it, holding it up to the faint light. It had always been warm against my skin, but now it was burning. Like it knew I'd finally noticed it wasn't just an accessory. I whispered a simple detection charm. The runes flared bright gold. Magic. Old magic. Not a trinket. Not a keepsake. An anchor. I yanked it off, expecting, I don't know, a dramatic burst of light? A chorus of magical voices announcing my destiny? Instead, it felt like the world tilted sideways. Magic roared through me, wild and unbound, like a dam breaking after years of pressure. I staggered, clutching my head as memories, half-formed and sharp-edged, flooded in. A woman's voice, soft and distant. Keep it on, Tilda. It's for your protection. A flash of fire. Screaming. A figure in royal robes, laughing. My mother's face. My real mother. I wasn't just some witch with a knack for petty hexes and emotional avoidance. I was part of this curse. My bloodline, my family, was tied to the royal betrayal Grayson had tried to cover up. I wasn't hired to break the curse by chance. I was chosen, because I was the key. Spite meowed sharply, snapping me out of it. He sat there, looking smug. Which, okay, wasn't unusual, but this time, it felt different. Because his eyes weren't just glowing, they were changing, shifting from cat-like green to something older, wiser, something almost human. I stared. Spite? He gave an exaggerated sigh. Finally. And then, he spoke. Out loud. You're remarkably slow for someone with ancient blood, he said, flicking his tail. I did the only reasonable thing. I screamed and fell backward. Spite rolled his eyes. Whoa, relax. I've been cursed longer than you've been alive. I was starting to think I'd die a cat. I gaped. You can talk? Yes, he said dryly. And you, apparently, can process world-altering information with the grace of a stunned potato. Spite, whose real name was something unpronounceable, involving too many vowels, explained everything. He'd been cursed centuries ago, bound to my family's bloodline as a magical familiar. The necklace had been designed to suppress not just my magic but his as well. Your family was powerful, he said. Too powerful. The royal line feared them. So they struck first, betrayed them, cursed them, erased them from history. I swallowed hard. And Grayson's family was part of it. Spite nodded. Not just part of it. They led it. I felt sick. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal, the lies, the curse, I still cared about Grayson. Which was inconvenient. And also terrifying. I stood up, clutching the necklace. I could feel the magic humming under my skin now, raw and sharp, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. Spite arched an eyebrow. So, what's the plan? I took a shaky breath. Simple, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We're going to get Grayson back. And then, I clenched my fists. Then I'm going to break the curse. All of it. Chapter 11, The Final Battle, and the worst love confession ever. You ever get so angry that you feel calm? Like the kind of calm where your brain says, ah yes, let's politely organize this rage into a neat little to-do list. Yeah, that was me. Step 1. Break into a castle. With style, obviously. Dorian's castle wasn't exactly inviting. Tall, dark spires, ominous storm clouds. Very cliché villain aesthetic. Honestly, I was half expecting lightning to strike dramatically as I approached. And it did. Twice. Because apparently, the weather was in on the drama. I stood at the gates, cloak billowing. Spite perched on my shoulder, like the judgmental gremlin he was. You know, Spite muttered, most people come up with actual plans. I cracked my knuckles. My plan is chaos. And with that, I kicked the gates open. Literally. Because subtlety is overrated. Step 2. Magical mayhem. The guards didn't expect a furious witch with a talking cat and zero patience. Bad for them. Great for me. I blasted through the hallways, magic sparking from my fingertips like I'd been born to cause trouble. Which, it turns out, I kind of was. Spite cackled gleefully as we left a trail of unconscious guards and scorched tapestries. Ah, destruction? It's been too long. I shot him a look. Focus, furball. We're here to save someone, remember? Whoa, right. Heroic nonsense. Got it. Step 3. Confront the evil brother? Because apparently, that's a thing I do now. We burst into the throne room, which was as dramatic as I'd expected. High ceilings, flickering torches, and of course, a smug villain lounging on a fancy chair. Prince Dorian stood as we entered, slow and deliberate, like he'd been waiting for this moment. He looked like Grayson if you squinted. Same sharp features, same royal arrogance, but colder, like someone had carved all the warmth out of him, and left nothing but ambition. Tilda Crowe, he said smoothly, like my name was a joke. I was wondering when you'd show up. I raised an eyebrow. Whoa, good. I'd hate to be predictable. Dorian chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You're too late. The curse is almost complete. Soon. No one will even remember my dear brother existed. My heart clenched. Not if I can help it. Step 4. Fight, because talking things out is for people without magic. Dorian snapped his fingers, summoning dark magic that twisted through the air like smoke. I didn't wait. I launched a spell straight at his face. He dodged, unfortunately. We fought, magic against magic, light against dark, me screaming with rage, and Dorian smirking like this was all very inconvenient for his afternoon schedule. Spite joined in, biting ankles, and causing general chaos. He claimed it was strategic. But Dorian was powerful. Too powerful. And then, step 5, the emotional gut punch. Because of course, I saw Grayson, collapsed on the floor behind Dorian, barely conscious, his form flickering like he was caught between reality and nothingness. I froze. For one terrible second, I froze. And Dorian took the opportunity. His magic hit me hard, sending me sprawling. Pain flared through my chest, but I didn't care. I crawled toward Grayson, my vision blurry, my heart breaking. Don't you dare disappear, I whispered, grabbing his hand. It was cold. Fading. His eyes fluttered open, just for a moment, and he smiled. That stupid, infuriating, wonderful smile. I knew you'd come, he whispered. I sobbed, actual, ugly sobbing, because I hated him. And I loved him, which was just the worst. Step 6, the worst love confession ever. I gripped his face, furious and heartbroken all at once. I don't hate you, I spat, tears streaming down my face. I hate that I don't hate you. I hate that you're charming and reckless and infuriating. I hate that you made me care when I never wanted to. He blinked slowly. Is that a confession? Yes, I screamed. It's a confession. Congratulations, you idiot prince, I'm in love with you. And it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And then, I kissed him. Not out of obligation, not to break a curse, but because I wanted to. Step 7, breaking the curse. Sort of. Magic exploded around us, bright and blinding, like the universe itself was holding its breath. When I pulled back, Grayson was staring at me. Alive. Real. Curse no longer. Well, mostly, because he immediately sneezed and accidentally set a tapestry on fire. I stared. He stared. Spite snorted. Well, that's new. Grayson grinned sheepishly. So, turns out the curse suppressed my latent magical powers. Oops, I groaned, burying my face in my hands. We won. Dorian was defeated. The kingdom saved. The curse broken. Mostly. Grayson still occasionally glows when flustered. Sometimes floats. Definitely sets things on fire when embarrassed. And me? I'm still grumpy. Still a witch. Still in love with the most irritating man alive. But you know what? I'm okay with that. Mostly. If you were cursed to turn into an animal every time someone complimented you, what animal would you hope to be? And what animal would be your worst nightmare? Let me know in the comments.